Office, and I am the hearings manager. For those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you're invited to speak by the chairman, as Zoom will pick up on all noises and you will be on screen. I now hand over to the chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. As at the beginning of every evidential session, a recording made last year is going to be played. For those listening to it for the first time, please listen carefully. I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I have made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I am satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it had been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on the person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it silently for any other purpose. In particular, you may transmit your account of what you have seen and heard in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event which you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequence will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I am sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them, and with my help if necessary, they will provide you with the answer. Mr. Corbyn, do you wish to be sworn or to affirm? I think you may be on mute. Mr. Corbyn, can you hear me?
I can.
Splendid. Do you wish to be sworn or to affirm?
To affirm, sir.
Yes. Then may that happen, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Corbyn. Can you see and hear me?
I can.
I understand that you would like to affirm.
Yes.
Thank you. Please repeat after me.
Okay.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Chairman,
Thank you. Mr. Warner.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Corbyn,
Yep.
have given us a 79-page statement dated last year, I believe.
Yes.
Before I ask you some questions, can you just confirm, please, that the statement that you have given us is true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you. Starting at the beginning of your political life, if I can, please.
Yes.
Right, I think that your political activism began as a student in the late 1960s in London. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
And in fact, the first march that you can recall attending was a campaign against nuclear disarmament march.
Yes. I did attend such marches when I was at school, actually, just before going to university. But those were quite limited in my activities. Most of my activities developed in university after the first 2 years at university.
I see. And I think it's also right that you became the president of the Imperial College Student Union.
That's right. I was elected president for 1969 to 1970.
And as part of that role and your political activities at that time, you were involved in a number of anti-nuclear campaigns and campaigns against chemical and biological warfare.
Yes, yes. The campaigns against chemical and biological warfare were very important to me in Imperial College and to all scientists. Dr. Stephen Rose, later Professor Stephen Rose, was in the biochemistry department and brought in a lot of information about these things, which was very useful.
You've told us in your statement as well that you attended both of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign marches in 1968.
Yes.
You've described that as the main issue of the day at that time. Were you a member of the VSC?
Well, insofar as I was actively supporting it, yes, but I wasn't. If it had a membership structure, I wasn't part of that. I was just an active campaigner for VSC, the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign.
So you didn't attend local or branch meetings or anything of that nature for the VSC?
Yes, there would have been one or two local meetings, yes, but it wasn't like a membership organisation, if you see what I mean.
I see.
The International Marxist Group was a membership organisation.
Yes, well, we'll come on to that in just a moment. Just focusing on the VSC marches, were you involved in organising them at all, or were you more of an attendee at them?
I was more of an attendee and a mobiliser. I would bring people along, bring along banners. And sometimes I might have been involved in stewarding, but that would have been of the people I brought along, essentially.
On either of the marches in March or October of that year, do you recall witnessing any violence or disorder?
No, although there was a big crowd around the American embassy in Grosvenor Square, which the police tried to disperse. They tried to prevent demonstrators getting to Grosvenor Square. But I wouldn't say any violence was initiated by demonstrators. It was the police trying to stop people going there.
Is this the October demonstration in 1960?
Yes, I think that was October, either 1968 or 1969, probably October 1968.
Were you yourself in Grosvenor Square in October 68?
I was, yes.
Were you aware of any weapons being used in the course of
No.
that demonstration? Mr. Corbyn, you've also said in your statement that the IMG, the International Marxist Group, of which you are a member,
Yes.
had been active within the Vietnam Solidarity
Yes.
campaign. How did the two groups interact? Were they inextricably linked, or were they separate?
They were separate because the VSC had a number of different political groups operating in it and supporting it. So it was what you might call a united front of different groups, and I think individuals who just joined in and became organisers, but I wasn't one of those.
So is it fair to say the IMG was just one of these groups that were?
Just one, but probably the most influential.
I see. And can I take it from that there was a lot of crossover in terms of people supporting the VSC and the IMG?
Yes, well, everyone in the IMG would have supported the VSC, I would say, yes.
Right. Mr. Corbyn, are you able to say whether the IMG were involved in any of the disorder that happened in the VSC demonstrations in 1968?
No, I mean, the IMG's role always historically was to mobilise people and make propaganda to a wider public on what was the nature of world conflict, the nature of US imperialism, and so forth.
I see. In terms of your political life, did you become involved in the IMG and the Spartacus League through the VSC, or were you involved before or at the same time?
I was interested in the VSC because you see, at that time, you have to think that was the thing going on in the world. And I remember at school, we would have discussions about Vietnam, you know. It was a formative crisis for tens of thousands of young people at the time, and I was one of them. Yeah, the reason why I joined the IMG wasn't specifically that, although of course I noted that the IMG was an important force in the VSC. I became editor of the University of London student newspaper, Senate, after being president of the student union. And it was around that time I noticed the IMG, and they got involved in helping doing some of the things I was doing, and then I joined them in about 1970. It was after I was president of the student union that I joined them. It wasn't during that time.
I see. Is it right that you became involved in the Spartacus League at around this time as well?
Yes, that's right. The Spartacus League. It was originally misstated as something else in the evidence, but we put it right in my statement here. Yes, the Spartacus League was part of the IMG, a sort of recruiting youth section, if you like. And I was an active member of that.
So just so that we can understand how it interacted with the IMG, was it run by the IMG?
Yes, it was. It was run by me.
Okay. And it was, as you described it, as a youth section. Can I take it from that it had a large student membership?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you be a member of the Spartacus League without being a member of the IMG, or were the two?
You could. No, you could. In fact, quite a number of people were, and I was that initially. And then if you proved your worth, the IMG would ask you if you wanted to join the IMG as well.
Right. So can we take it from that not all of the members of the Spartacus League necessarily went on to become IMG members.
That's correct. Some of them might have not been interested in that. Some of them might have lost interest in politics altogether, but most Spartacus League members would have become IMG members, yes.
I see. Can we just have a look at a report that we have recovered on the Spartacus League, and it will come up on the screen.
Okay.
It is.
Well, I've got a very thick file here, so I don't need to look through that, and that's useful.
Don't worry too much about that. I'll just read the number out for the technician. It's MPS-07-32360. And it's page 2 when it comes up, please.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Corbyn, you can see this is a report from January 1972.
Yeah.
Meeting of the Notting Hill Spartacus League at 17A Rendell Street.
Yes.
That was your home address, wasn't it?
That was my home address, yes. And we had a number of meetings of the Notting Hill Spartacus League there. And of course, I didn't realise at the time, but some of the people in the Spartacus League were police agents, and I was entertaining them in my flat unknowingly.
Were you the organiser of the Notting Hill branch?
I was, yes.
And what
to my recollection, yes, I am. I remember a lot of detail actually in the past, but there will be some gaps, I think. But yes, I was the organiser of Notting Hill Spartacus League, yes.
And just in terms of what that would have entailed, are we talking about sort of keeping minutes and agendas and things like that?
Yes, that type of thing. List of members and contacts, telling people when there are meetings, and then organising newspaper sales of the IMG paper.
I see.
It was called, well, it kept changing its name actually. It might have been Red Mole, something like that, but it did change its name in various stages.
We can see at the end of the second paragraph that 8 persons were present at this particular meeting. Was that a common attendance number for this group at this time?
Yes, half a dozen to a dozen, that sort of numbers. Yes.
All right. I'm just going to read the third paragraph out for the transcript. It reads, the meeting was chaired by Piers Corbyn and was concerned with the future activities of the Notting Hill Spartacus League branch.
Yeah.
Privacy briefly outlined the activities of the Notting Hill Red Defence Group, and this was followed by a deep and involved discussion of SL, Spartacus League, assistance to the group. Although Privacy took great pains to point out that the majority of people involved in the group were not members of the International Marxist Group and were completely non-sectarian and had no wish to be otherwise, the discussion centred around how the Notting Hill faction of the IMG could take over, run and use the organisation for recruitment to the IMG. Can you recall, Mr. Corbyn, what the Notting Hill Red Defence Group was?
I think that was an idea that we wanted. I might be wrong, but I think it was the same thing as what we later called, this is a People's Defence group, where you see, because of the way the police behaved at times in Notting Hill in clearly a racist fashion towards some of the population, that there should be a kind of independent people's policing, and we call that a Red Defence Group. That's as far as I remember, but otherwise I can't think what the purpose of Red Defence Group was other than that.
Just in terms of the last section of that paragraph, that the IMG could take over, run and use the organisation, was this something that the IMG frequently did with other groups?
Well, no. I mean, you see, this, of course, is written by a policeman who was presumably reading into a situation, something which he might have wanted to present to his superiors to confirm what they may believe. I mean, I myself, when I was involved in these things, was interested always in getting people to join in and stay active and make propaganda. The idea of taking over groups wasn't something that I thought was something that ought to be done. Because independent groups acting together, in my view, is a better way than having a sort of, takeovers, as you described there. So I would say on that likely the policeman was, or woman, whatever, was reading into it too much.
I think we know that this was a policeman, HM.
Yeah, okay, we do, but well, I think we do. But sometimes there were women involved in these groups. And the identity of the infiltrator has not been revealed to me.
Mr. Corbyn, can I ask this?
If I saw the names of all the people that were present at those meetings, I would probably be able to identify which one was the policeman. However, we've got a lot of redacted information in these reports, which, I mean, if you're trying to have an inquiry into what was going on in 1968, one needs to have maximum information, not limited information.
Can I ask this document's taken down, please? We're going to have a look at another report, please.
Okay.
It is UCPI 50-15694.
You've got a lot of documents in there. A lot of work has been done.
Yes, it has.
So I haven't got diaries, anything like. In fact, I don't even have diaries of these things. So this is a useful diary of activities I was doing, even if through the eyes of a policeman.
Well, Mr. Corbyn, this is what's described as an international Marxist group and Spartacus League conference.
Yeah, can I move this screen a bit further forward so that I can see it a bit better? Because the printing on this thing is not really good. Yeah, that's better. Okay.
And it was held in May 1972.
Okay.
And at the top of of paragraph 3, which we can see there, it reads, persons attending the conference were classified as either delegate, consultative delegate, observer, or visitor.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just scroll down to the bottom of that paragraph, please.
How do I scroll? Oh, I see.
No, don't worry.
Okay.
And thank you.
So which are we doing, in paragraph 3 or 2?
Just 3. So what we have there is 4 categories of people who attended this conference.
Yeah.
Are you able to recall which category you would have fallen into?
Let's have a look. So a delegate. Let's go through these again. So you can be a delegate. Oh, here. Delegate, consultative delegate, observer, or visitor. And that was 1972. Actually, I can't remember.
No.
I don't think I was an observer or visitor. I was either a delegate or a consultative delegate.
Thank you. The last sentence of this paragraph reads, the last category, visitor, was any person not a full member of either organisation who was sympathetic to the politics of the organisation. Such persons could attend open sessions only and had no voting rights whatsoever.
Yeah.
Can we take from this, Mr. Corbyn, that a member of the public could have attended this conference, but in that capacity?
Well, they weren't public conferences. They'd have to be invited.
Right. Even as a visitor?
Yes, definitely. It wasn't advertised as a, come and join in thing. It was, I think what would happen is that any of the groups or any of the parts of the IMG, any of the branches would have contacts, and they would say to contacts, that is people who were showing some sort of interest in what was going on, do you want to come along to the conference? And you can be there as an observer, see, and that's what would happen.
And I think, can we also take from that sentence that there were both closed sessions and open sessions? So
there were indeed closed sessions and open sessions, yes.
So even within the group of people who were present at the conference, only some could attend closed sessions, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's a bit like the London boroughs. They have council meetings where they have closed sessions and open sessions, depending on what they're talking about.
I see.
So it's a normal process in a lot of organisations in the United Kingdom.
Can we scroll to page 2, please, in paragraph 5 of that page? Thank you. Halfway through this paragraph, Mr. Corbyn, you'll see that I think Bob Purdy opened the proceedings. He then,
I remember the name.
He then called for an immediate vote on 3 items, and the first being the ratification of the fusion of the IMG with the Spartacus League.
Yes.
That's a vote that was then carried.
Yeah.
So can we take it from that, Mr. Corbyn, that from this point onwards, the Spartacus League became part of the IMG?
Yes, that's right. Well, I think the idea was that the Spartacus League as a youth section wasn't necessary anymore, and one would just have the IMG.
Thank you. I just want to ask you a couple of other questions about things that happened at this conference. Could we move to page 6, please? Thank you. And it's paragraph 24 that we're interested in. Okay.
It's a bit small on my screen. Can you make it?
Don't worry, it will get bigger if you just
okay.
Bear with us a moment. Thank you. Now, this is a topic that was raised at the conference. I'm just going to read it out again. Surjett's speech reiterated the now standard cliches of women's liberation, oppressed women in society, the struggle for equal rights, the establishment of the woman as an accepted member of society, and the fight against sexist male chauvinism. Her speech contained little that was constructive and confined itself almost entirely to an attack upon the men at the conference. This attack brought squeals of delight from most of the other female members of the audience. Mr. Corbyn, can you help us with whether that's an accurate description of something that happened?
I don't remember. I mean, Surjett, of course, is a kind of cover now, a party name, obviously. So I'm wondering who. It's a long time ago. Who that could have been? There were that sort of thing said, but I think perhaps that description of it is a bit over the top. I mean, there were certain, criticisms from women of the attitudes of men, but it was all in the context of we all being in the IMG together. But yeah, those type of things were said, yes, but the way that is put forward perhaps is a bit over the top.
Right.
So far as I remember, I mean,
Yes, well, that's quite understandable. Can we move to page 4, please? Thank you. And it's paragraph 16. I was just going to ask you a question about. It reads as follows: the conference took fraternal greetings from a Peruvian member of the FI, and I think that's the Fourth International.
Yes, it would be the Fourth International.
His speech was brief and delivered through an interpreter, was exceptionally well received. No doubt this was due to its revolutionary content, for the speaker called for revolutionary support for the armed struggles throughout the world, such as in South America and Ireland, and contained such stirring phrases as "the revolution will not be won until Marxist blood is spilled in the street. He ended with shouts of Viva la Revolution, and the audience duly rose to its feet and applauded. How seriously was statements like this taken by the IMG, Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I mean, there were numbers of statements like this, but I took them as being, well, used to be this this phrase around the IMGs would say, if you care to struggle, we will solidarize with you, which would mean that the IMG organisation would support, it doesn't mean endorse everything, support many things going on because they were against world capitalism or in particular US imperialism. But if you're leading to thinking, well, because people were applauding this group, whatever they were doing, therefore the IMG itself would want to do the same in the United Kingdom, I think that would be a completely wrong conclusion.
I see. This document can come down now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Corbyn, moving on to the IMG more generally, you've described in your statement that the IMG considered itself a revolutionary organisation. What was meant in your mind by that?
Well, it means that the idea of the IMG and the thought, well, the IMG in particular, would have been that the capitalist way of running things had to end, and capitalism was in crisis, and therefore there had to be a revolution into a socialist or socialistic of some sort society where the open market didn't determine how things happened, i.e. the strength of different capitalists didn't determine how things are happened, and you had a sort of more democratic process. But that's what it meant, yes. The word revolution doesn't necessarily mean violence at all. It means a revolutionary change, a big change, a fundamental change, a change in the basic way in which society was organised.
Did you consider this was, at the time, I'm interested in, did you consider this was likely to happen immediately or quickly, or was this a longer term?
Well, I myself, I do recall at some point having discussions with people, and so I sort of believed, yeah, it was all going to happen somehow within 5 or 10 years. Now, looking back, I think this was just delusional nonsense. But that's what I thought. Now, people in the IMG, I think they'd have a variety of views. Probably most people believed in a slow sort of process, because we recognised we were an infinitesimal group of a few hundred people and putting forward ideas which we hoped would catalyse people into better understanding of things. You know, you have to think that in terms of groups on the left, the left in the sense used in those days, the IMG was the one which did a lot of kind of theoretical work and kind of analysis of what the way world history was developing. I mean, in terms of any groups promoting violence, the IMG wasn't that. There were groups out there, maybe, which you know, would have had different views, but they weren't the IMG. I was in the IMG, not in other groups. I mean,
did the IMG consider that this change should come about through democratic means or otherwise?
Well, I would say democratic means. I mean, that would involve demonstrations and protests, but democratic means, yes. You know, you have trade unions, you have tenants' organisations, you have all sorts of groups which will bring together people. You see, to me, in my mind, change involves numbers, and that is the key. Whereas there will be some people that might have believed you had to kind of manipulate situations in a paramilitary fashion. This wasn't my view, or as I understand it, the IMG's view, which is why the IMG was the IMG as opposed to some other groups which might have had entirely different ideas.
Could we have a look, please, at UCPI 50-10944, please? Now, Mr. Corbyn, this is a thank you. This is a report by a police officer of a meeting held between the IMG and a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain. If we could scroll down to paragraph 4, please. Thank you. Tariq Ali, who no doubt you'll be familiar with.
Normally pronounced Tariq Ali.
Sorry, Tariq Ali spoke at this meeting and said as follows. Tariq Ali then thanked Anthony for coming along to explain the ideas of the Communist Party, but added that he disagreed with the basic concept that Parliament must survive, since it had shown only too clearly that it merely represented the interests of big business. What was needed, he continued, were workers' councils set up during the period of change which followed the revolution. Opposition ideas would be allowed, but control would remain with the great mass of workers through their councils. Would you have agreed with Mr. Ali in advocating for councils and the abolition of Parliament, Mr. Corbyn?
Yes, insofar as the way forward, yes, I would agree that you had to have accountability of the society run by the people from below. So you'd have these committees, which is obviously modelled in the Russian Revolution idea of Soviets, i.e. all the people in one area would represent that area or the interests of the workers or trade unions in that area. And that would then feed up to a more democratic control. It doesn't mean Parliament would disappear instantly, I would say, but you see, Parliament as it is, or then certainly, well, and now even more so, is controlled by external forces largely. And I don't need to tell you that there's a lot of corruption in the modern Parliament and conflicts of interest. And if conflicts of interest were removed from the modern cabinet, then it would be an empty room, which would probably be better. Anyway, we're digressing into the now, but you see, I think you can understand from the now why then, and I don't believe Parliament then was much better, though it probably was a bit better then, Parliament nevertheless, its function is essentially to carry out the wishes of those who have the main controlling interests in modern society, i.e. capitalists of various types.
Mr. Corbyn, thank you. Can we take this document down, please?
Yeah.
One of the officers who reported on you, HN353, whose cover name was Gary Roberts, has stated that the IMG was strong on words, but in hindsight, I think they were not really likely to act on them.
Well, yes, that's true. Well, that's true of most politicians, indeed. Well, although IMG members didn't think of themselves as politicians. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. So they would make big rhetorical things about revolution and class struggle and everything. But partly they were, I would say, theoreticist armchair socialists. Perhaps I was one of those at the time, although I was always very keen on activity and talking to people and communicating and getting people involved in demonstrations of various sorts against injustices of the time, like in the Irish issues, the various workers' struggles going on, tenants issues, housing issues, and so forth.
Well, we'll come on to some of those.
Yes, of course.
Mr. Corbyn, I think it's right that you later in 1972 became the organiser for the Notting Hill branch of the IMG, rather than the Spartacus League.
Correct, yes, because the Spartacus League then had disappeared anyway, so
Yes.
or been merged. Yeah, so yeah.
And these meetings again took place at your home address, is that right?
Yes, they did, generally speaking.
And we can see an example of one of these reports. Can we bring up, please, UCPI 608948?
You've done a lot of work to get all these things together. I'm impressed because I couldn't remember this stuff.
This again, I think you can see in paragraph 2, that's the same address in Rendell Street, so your home address.
Yeah.
And if we turn to page 4 of this document and just zoom in on the middle, just scroll down a little, please. Thank you. This is a document that I think you prepared.
Did I indeed?
That has been appended.
Well, so that must have been my typewriter at the time. Okay.
And what I'm interested in, Mr. Corbyn, is this is a prospectus for the.
I'm going close to the screen to have a look. It's some sort of. Oh, okay. And what's that of the?
I think it reads the initial plans adopted by the working group after many discussions was to undertake the following activities. So
okay.
What I'm interested in, Mr. Corbyn, is what the Notting Hill branch of the IMG were doing with their time.
Yes.
The first is Red Circle.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us briefly what Red Circle was, please?
Yeah, Red Circles were public events which were advertised, and it involved people sitting around in a circular fashion in a room, usually a hired room above a pub, and it would have speakers along on issues of our time. Like a speaker would come along about Vietnam, for example. The speaker would come along about the miners' strike, although then there wasn't a miners' strike, but there was later on. A speaker might come along about the situation in students.
I see.
So they were quite lively discussion groups and completely open to the public. So you give out leaflets, people would come along, and you would talk.
And the second thing we can see is mole sales. That I think might be a reference to Red Mole, the IMG.
Correct. That was the Red Mole sales, and we sold those in often in Portobello Road on what is now Portobello Green, a place I was visiting only a few days ago, campaigning for my election as Mayor of London and other candidates for the Let London Live campaign.
The third thing we can see mentioned is people's associations. Can you just help us with what that was? If you can.
Yes. I think this referred to what I mentioned earlier about Red Defence. The People's Association, I think, was some IMG contact whose name escapes me, wanted to have sort of grassroots community things which would kind of become community police to prevent the police or as an alternative to the police in their sometimes racist, often, normally I would say, racist approach to the area. And there was a People's Association set up by these guys who were not IMG members, but were sympathisers, I suppose. And it says that the PA collapsed in October. Yeah, I remember that, but I don't know why it collapsed. It might have been that the principal people moved out. I don't know. When we say intervention was successful, I think that meant that people had listened to what we'd said, and the organisation, the People's Association, managed to make some impact on its alternative policing ideas, but clearly it didn't last.
Were these associations controlled or run by the IMG, or were they
No,
entirely separate?
no. I remember the guy. I can sort of almost picture him in my mind. No, he was an interesting guy and would, said he was doing these things. Would we help and join in? So we did. It was I would say the IMG's role was essentially supportive. I would say it's important to understand the IMG did often support things without trying to control. I mean, whereas some other revolutionary groups were only into control. And I do remember the phrase, we should set up a support committee for this or support committee for that. Some strike or protest, that sort of thing.
Just finally, the last thing that was on there, we've just lost it, but it was the Claimants Union. What was the IMG's involvement in the Claimants Union?
I think again it was supportive. See, the Claimants Union then was just people who were claiming benefits and were not getting their just benefits, so they would form together and put pressure on the social security offices. No, I remember some of the activists there they weren't IMG members, but they were very dedicated people.
Was the IMG involved in the Claimants Union? Or just members thereof?
Well, in a supportive way. It says there, initial work totally unproductive. I don't really remember all the details, but it's something about their anarcho-hippie, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But there were some good people involved in Claimants Union. That's in my personal assessment. But they were really into one thing, that is making sure people got their benefits rather than wider issues, I think.
Could we just turn to the first page of this document, please, and paragraph 5 when we get there? Thank you. Thank you. Now, this is the report of the officer who has appended the document we've just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And the officer's written, the meeting then moved on to item 8 on the agenda, a discussion on the perspectives document produced by Piers Corbyn on the proposed merger with the Notting Hill and West London IMG groups.
Mm-hmm.
In that document, Corbyn used various coded initials in many instances, apparently to confuse the identification of persons, I think it says, if the document happened to fall into the hands of special branch. And then the officer goes on to say an appendix giving the identification of the majority of such coded initials is attached.
Okay.
To your memory, best of your memory, Mr. Corbyn, did you use coded initials when preparing documents like that? Yes,
that was the norm in the IMG. The theory was that if you had these coded initials or party names, then the special branch, if they were around infiltrating, or anyone who got these documents wouldn't know who was what. However, of course, the special branch were infiltrating us anyway, so they knew everything. A bit like modern mobile phones, people might be trying to keep themselves secret, but frankly, if Bill Gates wants to know what you said yesterday, he can find out.
How concerned were you as a group about material like this?
Oh, I took it seriously to use these party names or initials, although sometimes I couldn't remember who was who myself. So then maybe rather than a party name, I put some initials, which then people would know, what if PC was down there, it might stand for Piers Corbyn, although I had a different party name, which was not PC.
Your party name, I think, was Annual, was it not?
It was mostly. I think I had more than one party name, which people, started off with one or another. But I was called Annual, yes.
And I think that there is a report which we don't need to bring up, which confirms that.
Yes, it came from a nickname in a NUS conference. I was described as a hardy annual that always turned up. And actually, if you think about it, it should be a per annual. But anyway, that became my party name because the general public considered me as sort of an annual person who turned up to every National Union of Students conference there was.
Did just so that we can understand how widely used this was, did you know, for instance, the real names of most of the members of your local branch of the IMG?
Oh yes, I would know them by their real names and have to try and remember their party names at times. And you know, it might have given the impression that all these organisations were twice as big as they were. But anyway, that's how it was.
Can you thank you? And this report can come down now. How concerned can you remember how concerned were the IMG leadership about surveillance and possible infiltration?
I think they took it seriously, although possibly looking back to an extent, it was something which made members feel part of something bigger, something more important than perhaps it was, because we were quite a tiny group, really.
Did you take any other steps other than party names and occasionally coded initials to protect against this?
No, I don't think so. Well, obviously you don't leave documents lying around, you know, that sort of thing. Don't talk to people about who your members are, or talk to non-members about who your members are. No. Yes.
And just so that we can understand the motivation behind this, why were you concerned personally about other people or the police being able to be aware of what you were doing at your meetings?
Well, it was none of anyone else's business, I would say. So we had a right to privacy. That's all I would say.
I see.
Yeah.
You've said in your statement that you assumed that you were under surveillance, which would certainly fit with what you've told us.
Well, yeah, and the IMG generally people believe that we were, and I think there had been some evidence of that, which I didn't know about, but of course now I knew it was true, and much more extensive than I imagined possible. You see, it seems to be 3 officers who are pursuing me for various officers, but at any one time there seemed to be 2 or 3 pursuing me, and this went on for 10 years. That's a massive use of police time for what? For what? I mean, you know, I didn't do anything dangerous, nor did anybody, to my knowledge, in the parts of the IMG that I knew.
Mr. Corbyn, if we can turn to a slightly separate topic, can we please bring up document UCPI 608130, and sir, that's at your tab 13.
Oh, you want me to look at tab 13? No,
that's just for the chairman, Mr. Corbyn.
Sorry, yeah.
It'll come up on the screen. Thank you. This is a meeting of the London aggregate of the IMG, and I'm interested in the top of page 2, please.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just zoom on the top.
Make it a bit bigger. Oh, good.
Now, this reads as follows, the transcript. However, the main part of his speech was the 7-point plan as given on page 11 of the attached document, which deals with the way in which members of the organisation could become more deeply involved in the trade union field, especially engineering, local government, building trades, and the post office. Mr. Corbyn, what was the IMG's relationship with trade unions, as far as you can recall?
Well, the idea then was, the idea was to recruit trade unionists, or even members of the IMG would start working in certain fields and then build trade union branches or associations with the IMG, with a view to supporting trade union struggles and protests or whatever in different industries. It was termed an important thing to do rather than doing student work, as it was called. Now, student work wasn't being dropped, but its the point was that the IMG wanted to develop more into a wider field.
Will the IMG
To change society, you see, trade unions being the essentially the producers of wealth, so therefore potential to change society into something more democratic and accountable.
Were the IMG trying to gain control of trade unions?
Well, I suppose if they ever got enough members or supporters in a trade union, then they might become leaders thereof. But this stuff here was just at least to get a presence. That's all I would say.
I see. And I think we can possibly infer from this that the IMG, certainly at this point, was trying to get more involved
Yes.
in trade unions. Is it fair to say that you would support trade unions on specific strikes?
Oh, generally speaking, yes. I mean, well, as I said, there was a joke in the IMG, if you care to struggle, we will solidarize with you. So the IMG would go around supporting all sorts of things. Not necessarily the detail. You know, we have this phrase of unconditional, but not uncritical support for XYZ. So you'd say to these workers doing some strike or occupation, great, we support you completely. I mean, that protest or action might do something that we wouldn't have agreed with, but we'd say, well, okay, maybe you should have done this or that, but it doesn't mean we'd stop supporting the general project of this strike or occupation or whatever.
I see.
So it wasn't about control, it was about support.
Could we please take this document down and replace it with UCPI 607940, and so you'll find that at tab 3 of your bundle. Thank you. Now, I'm interested in the third paragraph, and I'm afraid it's a pretty poor quality document. So I'll try and read the second sentence. It reads, Piers Corbyn and privacy emerged as the leading personalities advocating a strong militant approach to the student protest march.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I should say, a report proposing a march against a miners' strike. Supporting a miners'
strike. To support the miners' strike, yes.
And the report suggests that you and other IMG members, in the face of opposition from international socialist members, proposed a march to the National Coal Board headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some suggestion later on that an occupation was envisaged.
Really? Okay.
Do you consider this a fair characterisation, Mr. Corbyn?
Yes, I do remember this. Actually, it was quite fascinating. I think there was some sort of student rally in Trafalgar Square, or I think it was mostly students, maybe even called by the NUS, supporting the miners. And we thought, or I thought, and my supporters, that we ought to march from there to the National Coal Board to call upon the Coal Board to give in to the miners. And that we did by a tactic of a group of IMG and supporters marching round Trafalgar Square approximately twice, chanting things like "March to the Coal Board," if I'm remembering the right thing. And then the crowd in Trafalgar Square just joined in. I thought, well, that's something to do. Let's go there. And there was a great big crowd went off to the Coal Board, and I remember being lifted on somebody's shoulders to speak with a megaphone about supporting the miners. But frankly, I don't remember anything about trying to occupy the National Coal Board. I suppose people might have thought of such things, but we were there to make a point that the whole country should be supporting the miners.
Now, Mr. Corbyn, you'll see the top of paragraph 4. It reads that the IMG SL, so I think it's Spartacus League at this point, members were obviously furious at the wishy-washy approach by the IS, and I think that's International Socialist.
That is, yeah.
Members who I think it might say contrived to gain support from the uncommitted members present. Now, evidently from that, there was both IMG and International Socialist
yes.
at this meeting. To what extent did you tend to interact and cooperate with the International Socialists?
Well, I think the general idea of the IMG was to cooperate as much as we could on joint activities. But on some occasions, the IS, for their own reasons, didn't want to cooperate. That's how I saw it going on, and this was an example. I can't, for the life of me, see why the IS wouldn't want to also march to the coal board, but anyway.
The tenor of this report, Mr. Corbyn,
That's what seemed to have happened.
Certainly suggests that the IMG group in this meeting wanted to go further than the IS group.
Yes.
Marches rather than directed marches rather than other things. Was that what tended to happen between the different outlooks in the two groups? Was that?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so at that time. Only all these groups have evolved in different directions. So, but mostly that would be the case.
If we could move to the second page, please, paragraph 9.
It's quite interesting remembering all this stuff. Thank you for, well, I don't know if I should thank you or not, frankly, but it's fascinating remembering in detail these little events, which, well, I think they were important at the time. I think they were important to do those things.
So paragraph 8, just before we go on to paragraph 9, Privacy also suggested that if possible, members should attempt to occupy the coal board offices, although none too hopeful of this, as he anticipated the building would be heavily protected.
Well, I think that's pretty obvious, yeah. Okay.
Now, paragraph 9, it says this. Privacy then called for 3 volunteers to take part in a special task during the demonstration, which would involve breaking the law. 3 unidentified members readily volunteered and were told by Privacy that he would later give them private instructions regarding this task. He assured the volunteers that if they were arrested and prosecuted, any resulting fines would be paid by the IMG. Can you recall, Mr. Corbyn, if this was an accurate description?
Well, I just don't remember that. I don't remember it. But I suppose your question might be, I mean, that could happen. I wouldn't rule it out, this. I don't think it's been made up by a policeman. Something must have been going on. But you see, when it's something breaking the law, I mean, it might be as simple as writing a slogan on a building or hoisting a banner over something. You know what I mean? I don't know. Unless we know what actually happened, I can't really comment further on that. But I was not one of these 3 volunteers, if indeed the volunteers came as described there.
Were things like this commonly discussed at IMG meetings or wider meetings? Plans to break the law in whatever?
No. I mean, mostly it was pretty mundane sort of stuff. But as I say, what they mean by breaking the law here is I think you have to find out what that is. See, why did the policeman report on what was, happening later on? I mean, that's what we need to know, or you need to know for this inquiry.
Well, I'm just interested to know whether something like this would have been a common occurrence or memorable, rather extraordinary thing to have come up at a meeting.
Well, I would say it's memorable and rather extraordinary because it's making promises about fines being paid or something, which is well, it suggests it's something risky. But mind you, of course, then you could easily get arrested for just doing a bit of fly posting, you know. So the actual the activity might not be such a big deal. But I'd like to remember. I'd like to know what it was. I mean, if they did this, I don't remember any traumatic thing happening. Maybe it just didn't work. Maybe the people involved dropped out.
More generally, Mr. Corbyn, what you've said in your witness statement that and I'm quoting, that an unjust law will inevitably be broken. What was your attitude towards breaking the law at that time?
Well, yeah, at that time I believed there were, well, I still believe there's just laws and unjust laws. Unjust laws get introduced by the powers that be in order to impose things, which may be incorrect. Now, at the time, my mind might have been concentrating on housing issues, and we could talk about squatting later, although you don't mention much of it, surprisingly, in these reports. But unjust laws are things whereby people are put in a position where they have to agree something when really they don't want to, but they're kind of blackmailed, or not bribed, but blackmailed and told, you know, if you can become a tenant or a licensee if you agree to leave when the owner wants you. But you see, this is a kind of I would say that's not a just law of treating people's housing rights. For example,
we'll come on to that aspect of your involvement a little later. I'm just interested to know, is this your view, or is this a view that was widely held amongst members of the IMG at around this time?
Well, that's my view, what I described. What would the IMG think about laws? Well, I think they would think something similar, in that you ask the question, where does law come from? You know, laws are agreed by, well, a parliamentary process, but then who is instigating things in this parliamentary process? You see, right now we have Parliament agreeing to allow the police to have even more spy cops powers than in the past. You know, and this inquiry has happened precisely because of spy cops, i.e. policemen infiltrating, overstepping a reasonable mark in their personal relationships between male policemen and women, and you know, consequent children, which was horrific. And that's the main reason why this inquiry is happening, I think.
Mr. Corbyn, just going back to the 1970s, I'm sorry to take you back there.
No, I don't mind, that's fine.
Would the IMG, in your view, have been open in calling for what was considered to be an unjust law to be broken by its members? Would that be something that was encouraged?
Well, I think it would be a specific thing, I would say. I think, well, you'd have to give an example. And I can't think of any specific example other than in the housing movement, when in fact it wasn't so much laws but rules introduced by short life housing organisations, and I said, well, you'd have to break these agreements because housing rights were more important than the interests of these housing associations. Now, you're looking for a law, some sort of law where the IMG said break this because it's unjust. Well, I don't know. But there were trade union laws. There were laws introduced against trade unions, yes, where the government at the time were trying to limit the powers of trade unions, the right to strike and so on. Now, those things like laws against the right to strike were considered, yes, definitely as unjust laws, and therefore should be challenged and broken. Yes.
Could we just?
And they would be specific. It wasn't like a. It didn't mean that it would be right to rob people. You know. I mean, so they would be quite specific. Like, I would describe them as politically motivated laws, if you like.
Can we just turn to another report on a slightly different subject, please?
Yeah.
It's at UCPI 608798. And sir, this is behind your bundle at tab 10. Thank you. This is a report which attaches a leaflet produced by you on behalf of the Notting Hill IMG regarding something called the Metro Youth Demonstration, which was held in June 1972. This demonstration, I think, Mr. Corbyn, was in relation to the Metro Youth Club, which was in Notting Hill and was popular within the black community at that time.
Right.
And I think that the march was concerning the police's raids and arrests at that club. In paragraph 2, it says, the assessment Mr. Corbyn urges is the next time a demonstration, I think that should say occurs, less attention, brackets, no attention, should be paid to the police who helped formulate the route. Why have you said, why was that something that you advocated, Mr. Corbyn, to not engage with the police for a demonstration?
I don't know. I'm just thinking. You see, well, it depends what the police wanted to do and what the Metro Youth wanted to do. I mean, it.
If we look at the second page, that
yeah, I mean, you see, sometimes the police would be trying to not help us, obviously. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Not obviously, but so I can't remember the details, I'm afraid.
Well, if I just read paragraph 3 under the heading of assessment, this is a document that I think you produced, so that this might help to
really
jog your memory. The turnout was about.
I can't remember if my typewriter looked like that. It looks like a different typewriter.
The turnout was about 60 people at the rally.
Whereabouts? Oh, yeah, down there. But assessment 3, yeah, okay.
Yeah, 40 people at the start of the march and 30 when it reached Portobello Road after returning from Harrow Road. The turnout was not very good, but the numbers are not at all important in any critical sense for this type of demo. The tactics of taking the demo down Portobello Road was proved to be absolutely correct. Many leaflets were given to people there. A lot of people talked about the matter because of the focus the 30 or so marchers created. The police completely foiled. They could not follow in their van.
Oh, it means were completely foiled, yeah.
Sorry, were completely foiled.
Yeah, I see that. I typed that.
And then the next sentence, which has been quoted in the report, says, next time, less attention, no attention, should be paid to the police who helped formulate the route, which in part went via empty streets, in which it was not, I think that should say, possible to present.
Yeah, I think it was
people.
Possible to present ideas to many people. Yeah, you see, the IMG's idea was that, you see, was presenting ideas to people. So marching down empty streets, which is what the police were advising, was not helpful. No, I can say that I'm glad we did go down Portobello Road. It didn't cause any people any trouble. And our leaflets, whatever they were about at the time, got more traction.
Just in terms of the interaction with the police, which
you see, the police can't try. You see, they act as if they're in charge of people's right to protest, and of course they're still doing that. And I think there have been occasions recently, to be fair, the police have said, okay, Mr. Corbyn or whoever, you guys want to go that way, all right, and they just say yes. But this time in Notting Hill, the police were anxious to prevent us getting our message across, I would say.
As a result of that,
and it was a peaceful message. It wasn't anything dangerous or violent, to my recollection, involved here.
Did you refuse to interact with the police as a result of that, Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I didn't seek to interact with the police, but when it became necessary or they asked me questions, I would interact. I mean, later on in the squatting movement, again, it was sometimes necessary to interact with the police. But that's what I would say. I mean, we were running our own show as far as I was concerned. And if the police wanted to advise us or tell us where we should go, we would listen to what they say. But, you know, we had to maintain that we had the right to protest and demonstrate where we wanted, subject to not endangering life and limb or whatever, of course, obviously.
So is this an appropriate point for a short break?
Yes, Mr. Corbyn, handwriters need a rest, and they have
Yes.
got 15 minutes.
Well, that's fine, Sir John. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is now 11:15 a.m., so we shall resume at 11:30 a.m. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the Chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Warner.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Corbyn, I'd like now to turn to a report, please, which deals with your proposal as a election candidate. It's UCPI 5017814. That's at tab 39, sir.
Good.
Thank you. This is a meeting of the South London branch of the IMG. I'm interested in paragraph 6 on page 2. Thank you. I'll just read this paragraph for the transcript. Privacy introduced the second major item on the agenda, the GLC elections, and said that the IMG intended to stand 4 candidates. The proposals put before the aggregate were that Piers Corbyn should be the IMG candidate for Lambeth Central, and that the great majority of South London resources should be devoted to his electoral campaign. Mr. Corbyn, can you remember how you came to be proposed as a GLC candidate?
I do remember the meeting, yes, and I was there, and people just said that I should do it. And I thought about it and said, well, okay, that'll be an honour. So I did.
And presumably in this election campaign, you did the usual things that a candidate does, leaflets, canvassing, things like that?
Yes, that's right. Standard sort of stuff.
Right. And if we look at another report, please, it's UCPI at 5017335. It's a tab 40. And it's paragraph 4 we're interested in for now. It's about halfway down. Thank you. This is a slightly later report, about just over a month later.
Okay.
Run up to the election. And paragraph 4 reads, Privacy, the campaign manager, reported that the majority of proposed public meetings would be cancelled because they appeared unlikely to attract any sizable audience. It was also evident he said, that there was insufficient time and resources to canvass the whole of the constituency, although it was essential to distribute Corbyn's electoral manifesto as widely as possible. The plan of activity was that during the forthcoming week, all available comrades would distribute leaflets throughout the day, canvass from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m, and afterwards go fly posting in teams of 3. Is that reference to fly posting, Mr. Corbyn, likely to be illegal fly posting or not?
Well, I don't know. It depends what they decided to do, but there was a fair amount of corrugated iron around those in the area, and I think often people would put fly posting on corrugated iron. Would they put it on places which would, where it might be, well, I don't know about illegal, but possibly unlawful. I don't know.
Okay.
But fly posters would just put fly posting around as they do in these days.
More generally, Mr. Corbyn, how do you feel? How did you feel learning that information like this was being reported on your activities to the police?
You mean learning now that this is reported?
Yes.
Well, 2 things. One is it's pretty innocuous what we were doing, it's fly posting. Am I concerned about these ongoing reports? Well, yes, because they're an intrusion into privacy, but without justification. Because if you can, spend this effort looking at election campaign groups fly posting or not, then, well, and ask, what about all the other candidates? I mean, there would have been, Labour Party, Conservative Party, Liberal at the time, I suppose, all sorts of people, all of whom might have done fly posting, but were, I think, not being spied upon by the police. And why was that? Why not spy on all of them? And there aren't the police resources to do this. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the spying purpose was for here, because it's unimaginable that in an election campaign we would be doing anything dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. I'd like, please, to look at the paragraph above the one we've just read, which is paragraph 3. It's on a different topic, but it's contained within the same report. Thank you. I'll just read that paragraph. The agenda of the meeting, which was chaired by Privacy, comprised 2 items, namely a report and discussion on Piers Corbyn's electoral campaign, which we've just considered, with allocation of comrades for tasks in the coming week, followed by a discussion on the anti-fascist demonstration to be held in Haringey on Saturday, the 23rd of April. And if we turn to page 2, please. Thank you, just the top of page 2. And we can see here that this is the second item being discussed. IMG intervention in the anti-fascist demonstration to take place on Saturday, the 23rd of April, 1977, at Duckett's Common, North 8. He explained that some 25 political and anti-racist organisations were joining to form a united front to oppose the National Front march and implement the IMG's policy on no platform for fascists. Mr. Corbyn, the events that are being discussed there were what came to be known as the Battle of Wood Green, which happened in April 1977.
Was I there?
Well, that was going to be my question. Do you remember Wood Green in April 1977 for that demonstration?
I don't know. Was Tariq Ali a leading light in this event?
I'm not sure, Mr. Corbyn. It was an event which took place, as I say, in April 1977.
Well, it was on St. George's Day, 1977, as you can see.
A large demonstration by a number of groups opposing a National Front.
Yeah. No, I think I would have been there, and I remember vaguely. If that or another event up there, I remember Tariq Ali speaking from the back of a truck or lorry, and me also speaking from the back of a truck or lorry. Probably a number of people speaking. I don't remember what you would describe as a Battle of Wood Green, though. Well, I mean, I think the idea was that just sheer numbers of this united front against fascism, sheer numbers of people like that present would ensure that the National Front wouldn't be able to pass through whatever they had in mind, because the police obviously would make sure that the two groups stayed apart, consequence of which would be that, quite likely I said IMG, but I mean this united front wouldn't be able to go anywhere beyond wherever they were, but the National Front wouldn't be able to either, which was the intention, to stop them spreading racist propaganda.
Well, thank you, Mr. Corbyn. The incident that did occur in April of 1977 at Wood Green resulted in some disorder. Do you remember violence or disorder of any kind happening at the march that you went to?
No, I don't. The thing that comes to my mind was me speaking with Tariq Ali and others from the back of a lorry. There was a big crowd around, but I don't remember disorder. I mean, it could be that disorder occurred and was then the only thing reported in the media. as like the end of this gigantic 500,000 rally that's just happened last weekend. And at the end of it, the police, I have to say, attacked a music sub-event in Speaker's Corner, Hyde Park, and that got reported in the media as if that was what the 500,000, possibly at least, demonstration was about, which of course it wasn't. So, you know, this report here might be partly from media, or possibly the eyes of a policeman who was concentrating, as he would naturally, I would say, on any disorder that took place. But no, honestly, I don't remember disorder at the event I am remembering, which sounds familiar, because there were these united fronts of action to oppose fascistic or fascist groups.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. There was another march in August of 1977 in Lewisham,
Okay.
Which was a similar march against the National Front.
Okay.
Are you able to remember whether you were at that event?
No. I mean, I didn't go to every event, you know, because...
Did you attend many events, marches opposing the National Front?
Quite a lot, yeah. I mean, I would have turned up at most anti-NF rallies, or perhaps half of them. I don't know. I don't remember Lewisham, but I do remember this something definitely happening in Haringey that I was at. Lewisham, I don't know. You'd have to tell me which part of Lewisham it was, and it might come to mind.
It was a big march through the centre of Lewisham in August 1977. It doesn't matter if you can't remember that one. I'm interested in more generally. Did you have much involvement with the Anti-Nazi League at around this time?
Well, yeah, I went along to Anti-Nazi League events, which were a kind of combination of united fronts against what was thought to be fascistic tendencies, i.e. Nazi tendencies, which were propagated by people like the National Front Party. But I didn't have any key involvement, no. I just went along as a active supporter of the Anti-Nazi League.
I see. And did the IMG have a particular policy on confronting or opposing right-wing groups at this time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it would have been... Well, I remember we supported the Anti-Nazi League, but I don't think the IMG was the main force in the Anti-Nazi League. I think there were a lot of groups involved in the Anti-Nazi League, and it became something which had a lot of happy music and did events on Clapham Common, for example, which were, you know, I think good creative events. In fact, irrespective of the politics, they, you know, got young people, you know, involved in things.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Just finally on this subject, that you told us a moment ago that you went to a number of these marches. Did you witness any disorder or violence at any of these marches that you went to?
Well, actually, no. You see, I think these ANL things and other anti-fascist demos, they were meant to be just largely large groups of people getting in the way of whatever the National Front wanted to do. Now, there may well have been confrontations indeed, or mostly there were confrontations between the police and the NF, or the police and the Anti-Nazi Leagues, because both sides would be trying to do something, ostensibly to get to the other, but really it was a kind of symbolic fracas, in my opinion. Well, I was never personally involved in those sort of fracasses.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Can we turn to a separate topic, please, and bring up report UCPI 50-21485. That's at tab 36. Thank you. And if we just zoom in on the paragraph 1, this is a report Mr. Corbyn submitted by a police officer with a copy of a Fair Fight internal document listing supporters of the campaign. Can you just tell us briefly, please, what the Fair Fight campaign was about?
Yes, certainly, with pleasure, actually. But I would say at the outset, this Fair Fight was a kind of absolutely, totally passive protest about fare rises. Why this should involve, police surveillance like this, I've no idea. But the Fair Fight campaign happened because Bromley Council had been to court to prevent the GLC, London Transport, but it was then the GLC's involvement in that, reducing fares, and Bromley Council made the fares go up. So then a Fair Fight campaign was formed, which was to fight these fare increases and make them go down. And what we were doing was we issued, not me personally, but I was part of the setup which did this, issued little booklets of what were called deferred payment slips, whereby if you travelled on the tube or the bus, you would hand in you would buy a 10p ticket. That was the smallest ticket you could do. And you would say on it that I today travelled from A to B and tendered a 10p ticket. And if you wish to recover the sum due, please contact me at, and you give your name and address. So these were handed in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Now, of course, it's up to London Transport then to chase people who hadn't paid what they said then should be the fare. And that was how the protest took place. And it was designed to cause disruption to the payment systems of London Transport and therefore, hopefully, get fare reductions. Now, without going into the details, I ended up being a test case for this in the High Court. It was called Corbyn versus Saunders, and we didn't win that case, and these deferred payment slips were not allowed. But the consequence of the campaign was that actually the fares did go down again.
Thank you.
I could go into the legalities of what happened in the High Court, but it was all about whether or not there was a comma present, and the judge said that the law should be read as if there was not a comma present when there was a comma present in the sentence, travelling on the tube without having paid the sum due, comma, and with intent to avoid payment thereof.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. We don't need to go into the legality.
Oh, okay, all right. It's just that I remembered in detail, and I was kind of surprised that I did, so I thought I'd tell you.
We've got plenty of detail on that from your statement. I'm just interested in knowing this campaign. What sort of methods did you use? Did you protest? Did you produce leaflets? What sort of things did you do?
No, the only thing we were doing was we might have had some placards and leaflets. Yeah, we did have leaflets. We had leaflets, well-printed leaflets, I remember, which everybody read. And I think you had a deferred payment slip on the bottom of each leaflet that you could tear off and use. And we handed out little booklets of deferred payment slips as well. That was the sum total of the campaign. Very, very focused, very specific, completely passive.
Is it right, Mr. Corbyn, that the campaign had quite a wide support base from other groups?
Oh, absolutely. It was hugely supported. I remember giving out leaflets on the tube train, and everybody who took a leaflet read it instantly, as if it was, the readership of our leaflets was much higher than newspapers.
But can we just turn to page 5 of this report? I think we can see some of the groups might be mentioned there. Now, I'm afraid this is the wrong way around, but the bottom half of this page we can see.
There we are.
They've solved it for me. Thank you. You can see reference to the Young Liberals, East London Libertarians, other groups. Thank you, like Waltham Forest Trades Council, Claimants Union, the Socialist Worker, International Socialists. It's right that this campaign attracted quite a lot of wide.
Absolutely. It was mass support, mass opposition to these fare rises, which had been imposed unjustly. I would say this was an unjust law, by the way, unjustly by Bromley Council, by something they did in the courts against a democratic decision by the GLC and London Transport to hold fares down.
Thank you. This report can come down now. I'd like to ask you, please, about a slightly different topic.
Okay.
It's correct, isn't it, that you became involved in a number of groups concerned with the situation in Northern Ireland in the 1970s? Is that right?
Yes.
And was that through the IMG, or was that entirely separately?
It was mostly through the IMG, but I was always slightly, or certainly interested in Ireland, because I remember as a child visiting Ireland, visiting Galway with my parents. So I was interested anyway in Ireland, yeah.
There are three groups which we'll talk about. The first is the ISC. I think it's right, isn't it, that the IMG... the
ISC is Irish Solidarity Campaign.
Sorry, I should say the Irish Solidarity Campaign.
Okay.
It's right, isn't it, that the IMG had quite some influence within the ISC?
Yes, that's true. Anything the IMG was involved in or initiated would often have the word solidarity in it. So it's like Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, Irish Solidarity.
I see. What was this influence? Was it an attempt to try and control the ISC, or was it more based on a similar support?
Well, I think it was a similar support thing. I mean, I wasn't very involved, but I did go to events. You see, the IMG idea in my mind then was to support or organise or initiate as the most effective groups in order to present ideas to a wider layer, wider population. So that didn't necessitate the IMG controlling things necessarily. Although some people like controlling things, I think the important thing was to build these groups so that they would gain traction.
Just in terms of the IMG's policy towards Northern Ireland, could we bring up UCPI 608129 behind tab 7? So. It's paragraph 13 on page 2, please. I should say this is a pre-conference meeting for the all London members of the IMG. And just in terms of this issue, paragraph 13 reads, after this, Peter Gowan spoke on the question of Ireland and IMG's attitude towards the situation there. He said the political committee of the IMG intended changing their official slogan on Ireland from victory to the IRA, I think that should say, to solidarity with the IRA. This measure was being taken as it was felt the former slogan was ambiguous. Can we take from this, Mr. Corbyn, that the IMG supported the IRA within the conflict in Northern Ireland? That was going on at the time?
I think from that you can say that the support, if you want support to mean literal support for what they do, as it was ambiguous. Now, I remember Peter Gowan. He was a great guy, a fantastic historian, and he's passed away, unfortunately, but he was, you know, a really wonderful fellow and very, very knowledgeable on history. So, you know, he would have been saying things which people would listen to.
Was that reflected?
I think the solidarity with the IRA would mean we support the right of or the campaign for a united Ireland. And although, well, obviously there are lots of things IRA were doing or appear to be doing, which I think we would not support. But the word solidarity here means a kind of general support for the aims. That's what I would say.
Would those?
That was my understanding of it. And this phrase, I'm not sure if that victory to the IRA sort of slogan was around for a long time or not, but it's clearly could be misunderstood by all sorts of people. So it was right to change it if in fact it existed as a significant thing anyway.
Mr. Corbyn, just so we're clear, you've said that the IMG would support some aspects of the IRA's policy.
Well, i.e. the aims, that is, there should be a united Ireland, and that the division of Ireland in the 1921 division of Ireland was wrong, and you know, the whole of Ireland should have stayed as Ireland. But yeah, you know, that's, of course, it wasn't the case. I mean, there was a, you know, well, we still do have a divided Ireland.
Would the IMG have supported the tactics used by the IRA or not?
I would say no. Well, it depends which tactics you are, because you see the IRA or their political wing, Sinn Féin, did all sorts of things which no one would disagree with, like they built community groups to help people who were unemployed and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, they covered a broad front of activities. And I would have thought really that when they talk about solidarity with the IRA, it meant they would be, in reality, having solidarity with Sinn Féin, which was the political angle of the struggle for a united Ireland.
I see. Turning, please, to the ISC, and we can take this document down.
Mm-hmm.
You've told us in your statement the ISC was established to provide a network of for the nationalist community in
Mm-hmm.
the UK. What was your involvement in the ISC?
Well, small. When there were meetings, you see, I think the ISC probably coordinated things like coordinated with the the Anti-Internment League, AIL, which was, and that did interest me. And they would work with other things. The Troops Out movement was another thing. So they were all different groups which were mobilising on the Irish question. And I personally, and I think most IMG members, would definitely go along to things involved with the Anti-Internment League, because, of course, I don't know if you know yourself, but at that time, the British government were arresting people in Ireland who they deemed to be dangerous and imprisoning them without trial. And this, you see, is against all democratic processes under English law. So we were just campaigning for very basic human rights.
Thank you. Is it fair to say you attended meetings of all three of these groups? So that's the ISC, Michelle and Tom.
I might have, but not in any large role. I mean, the Anti-Internment League would have been the main thing I would have gone along to.
So can we take it from that you weren't involved in any management or organisation?
No, not involved in any management or organisation of these campaigns.
And in terms of their activities, what would they do? Are we talking about marches and leaflets and things like that?
Yeah, they had marches and leaflets in Kilburn. I remember marches and leaflets in Shepherd's Bush Green, because there's a big kind of green triangle with Shepherd's Bush Green, and that would be a good place for meeting. Quite a lot of Irish people living around there. And there were quite a few Irish people, because at that time, you see, it depends what time this was, but between 1972 and 1975, I was squatting in Elgin Avenue, Paddington, and there were quite a number of Irish people squatting as well, some of whom were undoubtedly Republicans in the sense they supported the Republican cause. That doesn't mean they were involved in the IRA in any way, but that sort of fact, the label Republican can lead to confusion. I mean, Republican means supporting a Republic of all Ireland. That's what it meant in those days, anyway.
I think what may be obvious is that all three of these groups are Republican groups.
Yes.
in one way or another.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In terms of their aims, did any of these groups advocate for the use of violence in furtherance of those?
No, not to my knowledge.
Did they support the use of violence by others in Northern Ireland on either side of the divide?
Well, I don't think so. No. I mean, you see the violence from both sides was in the end, I would say, counterproductive. And in the end, of course, we have peace now in Northern Ireland, or relative peace, which has got rid of the troubles, as they call them.
In your memory of being involved in these groups, did many of the people who were members or at meetings advocate individually for the use of violence in furtherance of the causes they supported?
No, I remember when Bloody Sunday happened, going on a big demonstration at Trafalgar Square, or it must have been the day after or something. Trafalgar Square and down Whitehall and Downing Street, and the police tried to break it up, and then there were various scuffles with the police, but that's all they were. And I was arrested, in fact, for something, and I think I got a minor thing, a conditional discharge or something, so it wasn't a big deal. But then you have to realise what was happening. I mean, the British Army had shot at defenceless people, and so there was a huge amount of anger, and that was, a big demonstration. But that was, the anger was against what the British Army had done, and the British Army was effectively suppressing the people's rights, and which had included internment of people in a totally undemocratic fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. I'd like to move on to something you mentioned a moment ago, please. You mentioned that you were involved in the squatting movement from, and I think it's from about 1972 onwards.
Correct, yes.
You've said in your witness statement that this was perhaps through the IMG that you became involved in this.
No, it wasn't through the IMG. At that time, I was a member of the IMG.
I see.
I became involved in squatting because I lived in Notting Hill at 17A Rendell Street, and I took the landlord to a rent tribunal and got the rent halved. And then the landlord gave me a notice to quit because we did not have furnished tenancy security. And my elder brother, who was sharing the flat with me, not Jeremy, who's younger than me, the elder brother called Andrew Corbyn, who has unfortunately since died. But he said to me, why don't we squat? Piers, why don't we squat? And I said, don't be silly, only hippies do that. But anyway, nevertheless, we did squat. And the IMG view of this was that maybe this was it's okay, you squatted. But when I started saying, we should organise things in squatting because we have to stop evictions, some of them, people in the IMG, were opposed to this and said, no, we should do things which they described as the real tenant struggle in Notting Hill.
Oh, I see.
But I did convince them that they should actually support what I was doing, and they did in the end, and we achieved very great things there.
Well, we'll come on to those.
Yes, of course.
The
answer to your question is no. I got involved because of my housing needs.
I see, and we can take it from that, can we? That certainly the IMG involvement, the faction, I think you said, was in your statement, was quite small, at least.
Well, yeah, it was. We set up an IMG squatting fraction to sort of explain to the IMG people what was going on. And also get practical support for when we did things. And that actually was a good thing to do because in the end, we were very successful, and the IMG or other left groups realised the importance of this form of action to help house the homeless.
I see. Can we please bring up UCPI 609509, please? It's a tab 27, sir. Mr. Corbyn, this is a report submitted by a police officer with a copy of EZ 111, which was a document which we'll look at in a moment, published by the Maida Hill Squatters and Tenants Association.
Yeah.
And I think this was produced after what's described as the successful campaign of the Elgin Avenue squatters.
That's right.
Which led to them all being rehoused. And this is a campaign that you were involved in.
Well, I was the key organizer of it.
Key organizer, yes. Just in brief, it's right, isn't it, that this was a squat that you had become involved in vacant houses due for demolition.
Yes.
And after a campaign by you and others, the council agreed to rehouse you all, and so you left. Can we turn, please, to page 9 of this document? Thank you. And I'm interested in the section that reads demolition in the bottom left of the page.
Bottom left.
Don't worry, it will come up, Mr.
Oh, it'll come up.
There we
okay.
are.
Right.
This is a document that you produced, or possibly with others, demolition. The part under demolition says,
yes,
on the dawn of Thursday, October the 16th, 200 police were in Elgin Avenue outside the empty houses. They had been booked for the eviction if we had not gone. Can we take it from that, Mr. Corbyn, that in the process of the attempted eviction, the police had attended in some numbers if you hadn't agreed to leave?
Well, I think, what happened, October the 15th at noon or thereabouts, the GOC and police agreed that we would all be rehoused and the police would, if you like, supervise and assist our leaving. And we went to South London in vans or whatever, organised by the GOC. Now, we didn't know, but in fact, the police had a plan that if we hadn't left, there would have been a mass eviction on the following day, probably. Well, they like doing these things at 6 a.m, so probably it would have been at dawn on the next day. But curiously, and that's when the demolition began, the police carried out their exercise anyway and all turned up, but which was obviously completely unnecessary because nobody was going to try and get back in there because we'd all been successfully rehoused. But, these things have the life of their own, don't they?
Could we turn to page 2, please?
But I remember turning up there at dawn because I got a phone call to the effect that, or some call. How did I know to be there?
Thank you. It's the bottom.
Yeah, well, we knew the demolition was going to happen, so we went there to watch.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. I'm just going to read a small section out, then I'll ask you a question or two about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the very bottom part of this page that says, our collective organised strength and support meant we could physically resist in a confrontation. Human justice would be on our side.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever happened, the GLC had to lose and we had to win.
Yeah.
Now, in your witness statement, you've told us that an announcement which was made in this case to defend the squat against eviction often led to rehousing.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Was an announcement to physically resist the eviction therefore a tactic, or was this something that was realistically going to happen if they hadn't been out?
Well, I think realistically that a crowd of people standing around outside a building, even though we built barricades, would not prevent the police or the bailiffs gaining control. So our barricades were, although physical, in their effect, they were largely, or in fact, primarily symbolic and political, to say, what's behind the barricades is right and the police trying to, or the bailiffs trying to remove people is wrong. And we put forward clear demands about the right to housing for everybody and the need to use up empty properties, which the GLC had. And GLC councillors, to give them their credit, accepted our argument only after we had projected this idea across people and got support from local tenants associations and Westminster Trades Council. And then they gave in. And Richard Balfe, the chair of the Housing Management Committee, organised adequate rehousing. I remember having a meeting with him and others in the town hall where he had to basically shout at GLC officers to tell them they had to find this housing for these people by a certain time, which they did, because the GLC had huge resources of empty properties.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Could we look at the bottom of page 3 of this document, please?
Yes, I hope so. I remember typing this. This was a long time ago, but anyway, there you are.
Right. And now this page has what appears to be a quote from you at the bottom. I'm just going to read out, and I do apologise that it's not that clear. I think it reads, even though we had more than average for London's homeless of desperate, disorientated people, our organisation and policies won. At the end, people were more ready to physically confront the police and state than I expected. The street meets were the pooling and creating of all of all our strength. Our victory proves the indomitable spirit of humanity. The lessons of Elgin and other struggles before it everywhere will be used in 1,000 struggles to come in housing and workplace until capitalism is finally smashed and the world, our world will be ours. Now, Mr. Corbyn, I'm just interested in that where it says the people were more ready to physically confront the police and state than I expected. That seems to suggest that there was at least a realistic prospect that there could have been some violence if the event happened. Would you agree with that?
Well, but where would the violence come from? You see, what it meant was we would call upon people in the buildings to stay put, which they did. In the weekend before, we had 200 people in the street, only 3 people left. Only 3 people left, despite the fact they knew that there was an eviction imminent at that point, because we hadn't got a offer of housing at that point. The weekend before, it came on the Monday morning. What that meant was you wanted people to stay in the buildings and be in the way of any police or bailiffs who would try and come in. So any violence would have to come from the police and bailiffs. And there would be a crowd outside from local squatters. There were hundreds of squats in the area. And they indeed turned up and stood outside on the day when we were rehoused. In that case, it was for solidarity, i.e., moral support, if you like. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that people were ready to take up armed struggle or anything approaching that against the state. As I said, the purpose of these things was political persuasion of those in power so that it became politically necessary for them to do what we wanted, i.e. house the homeless.
Could we just have a quick look at the top half of this page, please?
Sure. I'm remembering these people now. I see them. Heathcote Williams, he's died now.
Now
he wasn't a squatter. He was, but not there. He was a supporter.
You'll be able to see that the second person who is mentioned on this leaflet is listed as 25 single.
Michael Johnston, 25 single.
I'm interested in what he says towards the end of the paragraph ascribed to him. And it says, if they hadn't given us rehousing and let us inspect it, and if the sheriff and police had tried to break the barricades without our consent, I would have thrown rubbish and card, I think that possibly says. I was ready to...
No, sand, I think.
So sorry, sand, you're quite right.
Yeah.
I was ready to meet their violence with violence. If it meant prison, it meant prison.
Okay.
How does that fit with what you've just told us, Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm telling you what I thought and how we initiated, or how I organised the struggle. There's an individual there who's saying he would have been ready to to meet their violence with violence. That's what he says. So I wrote down what he said, that's all. It doesn't mean that we were putting forward such a thing.
But certainly that members...
We, meaning me writing this news sheet, and the sort of small committee of immediate active supporters, some of whom might have been in the IMG, but it's we were a self-organised democratic setup in Elgin Avenue. I don't remember this guy. I think 25 means not his age, but the house he lived in.
I see.
So it's number 25 Elgin Avenue.
You've said you've said in your statement that you were surprised at the readiness of people to confront. What did you mean by that? Why were you surprised by it?
Well, a threat of eviction is a very fearful thing. And what had surprised me was the weekend before, I said to everybody, look, we're going to build barricades. We're still trying to make the GLC rehouse us all. They may come evict us next week. Please stay put. And people did, despite how fearful it was, if you think about it, because people had seen evictions in other places. They'd seen the police storming in, or the bailiff storming in backed by the police. And on occasions there might be arrests, but it's a scary thing. And I said, well, it is a scary thing, but if we stay put, they may indeed rehouse us, which is what happened. So the resilience, if you like, was people deciding to risk, an unknown, potentially, hurtful situation. As I said, only 3 people left the street in that previous weekend, and that really, I knew at that point we'd win. That Monday morning, I knew we'd win because only 3 people had left the street, and the GLC could see us. They could see the banners, they could see the barricades, and they thought, well, okay, they're actually right. These squatters are actually right. So we won. So this thing about risking things wasn't about violence. It's about people being ready to, face violence from the police and bailiffs, if you like. I mean, I would regard breaking down a door with a sledgehammer as a violent act. Okay, it's maybe not against a person, but it is a violent act, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Just lastly on this, the very last thing you've said at the bottom of the page is about smashing capitalism. Can we take it from that your involvement in the squatting movement was linked to your political activities at that time, and the two? Well,
no, I was in the IMG, so I would tag on these sort of things, but that wasn't my motive for being involved in squatting. My motive for being involved in squatting was to, 1, house myself, and 2, house others. And the consequence in the end of this victory in Elgin Avenue was that the GLC revised its whole policies completely. There were 10,000 squats in GLC properties, and 2 years later, the GLC gave tenancies to all 10,000 GLC squats, and that followed on from our struggle, and that was a fantastic victory, and achieved without any violence or even a single arrest, or a single arrest at the barricades. I mean, people did get arrested for sometimes entering squats or whatever, but in terms of our campaign, we were totally peaceful. And the IMG went along with what I was doing. There wasn't any attempt to make us more anything or whatever. They said, yeah, well, that's fantastic, Piers. You know, you've achieved a lot of things here.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. I think, shortly after also became involved in a similar issue at the Huntley Street squat.
Yes.
Could we please bring up UCPI 50-21215? Thank you. And this is a report of a meeting at which you spoke, I think, on behalf of the Huntley Street Squatters campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's a meeting held in Conway Hall in March 1979. Mm-hmm. And it was held under the auspices of the People's Commission, and was concerning persons unknown. And I think that was connected to the Persons Unknown trial, which was around at that time. The report notes that the majority of those present were from Persons Unknown and Friends of Astrid Prohl, and says among other groups represented were the Anarchist Black Cross, the London Workers Group, Gay Activist Alliance, the SUS campaign, and then we see the Huntley Street Squatters campaign. A number of these groups are anarchist groups, Mr. Corbyn. But what connections did you have other than speaking at meetings like this with anarchist groups?
Well, I knew some of these anarchist group operatives, but I'm trying to remember. I do remember meetings in Conway Hall, but what was this?
Well, if we scroll
People's
down,
Commission, what was that?
If we scroll down to the second half of the page, that might help. Paragraph 4, thank you. If we could just go up a little, thank you. I'll read out what it says. David Morris acted as the spokesman for the Persons Unknown and said that the purpose of the People's Commission was to examine the evidence of the ways in which the laws were enforced by the police and to hold a demonstration against the police later that year.
Okay.
You've told us that you went to some meetings with anarchist groups. Did you share any of their aims or objectives?
Well, the aims and objectives here were about organising some sort of tribunal, which was aiming to get the police to presumably not do certain things they were doing. And it said, have a panel of judges. I suppose these were judges which were like people judges, as opposed to getting a judge from a court, I suppose. Should liberal types be invited to? Who is this a document I meant to have written, or what? Well, no, this is a document from the police.
It's from the police, but
special branch who are posing these questions. I understand. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
It's a meeting at which you spoke.
Yeah.
Your name is on the.
Sure. No. I'm sure I would have spoken, saying, "Look, we have to call the police to account," which is something which applies now as well as then. And well, I mean, as you know, I'm standing as a mayor candidate in the coming elections, and I think the police do have to be more accountable. That's what my involvement in this would have been about. It wouldn't have meant that I would. You see, I wouldn't have known all of these groups anyway. I'd know some of them, that's for sure. But you suddenly lost that thing. Doesn't matter, does it? Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Corbyn.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that. To my mind, when I was speaking there, that was about holding the police to account, so they didn't do things which were illegal or unjust. The fact that the meeting included anarchists is really neither here nor there for my attendance. I mean, I don't come or go to meetings based on who's there. I come or go to meetings based on what needs to be said to people, well, which could be there, or people who could be perhaps not there, but hear what was said.
So is it fair to say this is, as far as you can recall, a meeting at which you shared a common cause with other people who were there?
A common cause in terms of calling the police to account, yes. But beyond that, don't remember any common cause.
Can you remember other meetings with similar groups, anarchist groups, on different causes, or is this a?
No, I don't. I mean, within the squatting movement, there were all sorts of political groups operating. Quite a lot of religious groups operating. Hare Krishnas operating, Children of God operating, and different anarchist groups operating. And so I just regarded them as people who were operating and hoped they would cooperate when we needed numbers to make a point, like, getting someone's gas reconnected if the gas company had disconnected them, for example.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbyn. There's
Okay.
just one more issue I wanted to ask you a question on briefly. Could we please bring up a copy of your witness statement? It's UCPI 50-34186, and it's page 59, paragraph 173.
Oh, right. So I've got it in front of me anyway, but you're going to show it.
It will appear on the screen.
Yes.
Now, it's about a section of your statement where you were asked whether you recall Colin Clark, who is a UCL
yes.
HN80.
Yeah.
And you say there that you remember him selling Red Mole every Saturday morning.
Yes.
Now I think, Mr. Corbyn, you have in fact seen a photograph of HN80 before you gave evidence today. Now I just want to ask you this, please. Red Mole was a IMG publication, wasn't it?
It was.
And I think we know that HN80 reported on the SWP exclusively. Would it have been very unusual for a member of the SWP to be selling the Red Mole every Saturday morning?
Oh, it would. That would have been not a thing they would do. So perhaps I've got confused about who I saw. See, I've been shown some photos, but they aren't photos I recognised. But I do remember the name Colin Clark. Now, he could have been a policeman infiltrating in the IS, the International Socialists, who could easily turn up at things we were at, but he wouldn't have sold Red Mole. So perhaps my memory is confused. I don't know. I mean, but I do remember a Colin Clark, and he was quite an intelligent, knowledgeable guy, and I didn't suspect him of being a policeman at the time. Well, as I said here, he was a good conversationalist.
Mr. Corbyn, thank you very much. Those are the only questions.
So I don't. So perhaps you can refresh my memory. I mean, have I actually been shown a picture of Colin Clark or somebody else?
You have.
I didn't recognise him, so perhaps this wasn't then Colin Clark, who was long auburn hair. But I think I'm describing Colin Clark accurately.
Mr. Corbyn, it may not matter. I just thought it was important that you had an opportunity to know.
No, thank you. I mean, I just wanted to say that I don't. I mean, looking back, I'm kind of staggered to think, oh my God, these people in front of me, helping or whatever, including in my flat and so on, were actually policemen. And of course, these policemen involved would indeed have assisted in the things we were doing, which, if what we were doing was illegal or dangerous, then of course it must be questionable as to the police's role. I do remember specifically infiltrators in the Huntley Street squad. They were called Nigel and Mary, and we suspected these people were police agents or something. And indeed, at the eviction, there was an eviction in the case of Huntley Street, there was rehousing in the end as well. But this Nigel and Mary were police agents, because in the subsequent court case, because some of us were arrested, and it's curious, there's not a report about this in these documents. I asked in court to Michael Ellis Harris, the Under Sheriff of London, who were Nigel and Mary. And he said they worked for me. And the whole court, it was the biggest court in Mali, the Magistrates Court, went totally silent. And the magistrate went berserk. He said, "You mean to tell me that you had police agents working for you, but helping the squatters go around London, collecting corrugated iron and building barricades against the law?" And the magistrate was very angry. But it seems to me now that since you haven't mentioned this, Nigel and Mary, perhaps they were working directly for the Under Sheriff of London, not for the police, and not part of special branch. I don't know, but I think that's something which Sir John Mitting might want to look into, that there was other things going on involving other branches of the state, not just special branch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbyn. I don't
Thank you.
Mr. Corbyn, the remit that I have
Yes.
occupies my time and that of the inquiry team without extending it any further.
I guess that's a fair comment. It's just that I'm a bit fascinated that, you see, my main activity then was, loads of stuff in squatting, but they concentrated all these things about Irish issues and so on, when there was a lot going on in squatting, including infiltration. So who were Nigel and Mary, apart from being linked with the Under Sheriff? Okay, you can't extend the inquiry, I don't know, but it's an issue anyway.
Thank you. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to wait for a quarter of an hour at the end of every witness's evidence. Time is allowed for call participants to propose questions to the inquiry. And if you wouldn't mind coming back in a quarter of an hour, I'd be grateful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is 12:30 p.m, so we shall resume at 12:45 p.m. Thank you. to continue proceedings. Chairman?
Thank you. Mr. Warner, I understand there is one question that you are going to ask Mr. Corbyn at this stage.
Yes, sir. Mr. Corbyn, can you hear me all right? Mr. Corbyn? I think you might be on mute.
Got it.
Right. Mr. Corbyn, I've just got one follow-up question, if you
Sure.
don't mind. You told us earlier this morning that the IMG did try to support other groups without controlling them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you went on to say that some other groups, revolutionary groups, did join others in attempts to try and control them.
Yes.
Drawing a distinction between the IMG and these other groups.
Yes.
Can you help us, please? Can you remember what other groups used to do that?
Well, the impression I had, and I think it was accurate from my memory, is that the IS, International Socialists, were normally very intent on controlling whatever they were doing. So they would have things which we would describe, or I would describe as fronts. So, you know, they would have some campaign or other called something, but really it was just being controlled completely by the IS. The IMG did, I suppose, well, yeah, the IMG would have a less controlling way of doing things. Although, of course, in all these groups, there are people who would be intent on control because it's easier to manage, possibly. But you see, it's not necessarily more effective. You know, I think the important thing is to get more participation, and I think that was generally the IMG view.
Is it just the IS that you were thinking of, or any other groups, or is it them in particular?
Well, there would be other groups like anarchist groups who would really just be very self-contained and wouldn't want anybody interfering with them, if you like, and would probably, they might indeed set up campaigns or front campaigns, but they would indeed be totally in charge of them. But the anarchist groups, to be fair, would also just turn up at meetings and join into anything. So there wouldn't be a consistent pattern with them.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. That's the question I have for you.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes your evidence now. May I thank you for bringing it to light?
Sir, excuse me, may I ask for permission to ask a few questions? I thought I had an automatic right, given I represent Mr.
Corbyn. You wish to ask questions in re-examination?
If I may.
I apologise, I had overlooked that fact.
No, it's not a problem.
Okay.
I'll just use a small part of my allotted time, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Corbyn, just a few matters.
Yep.
Looking back at over 50 years of activism,
Yeah.
have you, in your opinion, ever engaged in any political activity that you consider was subversive in that it threatened the safety or well-being of the state and was intended to undermine or overthrow parliamentary democracy by political, industrial, or violent means?
No, I haven't. Neither then, nor since then, nor now. I mean, obviously, things happened which could be misinterpreted in those veins. But you see, no, I would say the answer to that is no.
Now, amongst the intelligence reports that have been disclosed to you, there are a number that indicate that a particular SDS officer who uses the nominal HN338, an officer who's no longer alive, attended at least 3 small political meetings at your home in 1972.
Well, I want to know who this HN338 was.
Yes, I understand. I mean, the position is that we don't know his cover name, and you haven't been shown a photograph of this particular officer from the 1970s. And my question is this: I mean, if you were given his cover name, and if you were given a photograph of him from the early 1970s, might that assist you in remembering more about this particular officer and the nature of his spying on you?
Oh, it certainly would. It certainly would. I mean, seeing a face brings forth memories. You see, I remember Colin Clark. I'm slightly puzzled that I didn't recognise his photo, but on the other hand, photos and memories can be confusing. But I do remember this Colin Clark, who was a, friendly sort of guy. I remember a Paul Pearsall being active in Imperial College and also sometimes coming to my flat. Could he be HN338? I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you. Could I please ask for the following document to be put on the screen? UCPI 50-10850. And sir, I think it's a tab 34 of your file. But Mr. Corbyn, you'll get it on the screen.
Okay.
You can see from the top that it's a special branch document. And if you look at the first 3 lines, it reads as follows. The following has been received from a reliable source and is based on 12 months acquaintance with the squatting field in London. And you can see it's dated the 12th of August, 1976.
Okay.
And unless I'm missing it, we don't know the author of this particular document. It doesn't appear either by number or by name anywhere. Have you had the opportunity, Mr. Corbyn, to reread this document?
I have, yes, I have.
In your opinion, does it accurately portray the squatting movement in London in 1976?
Well, partly, but in its general view, I would say no. You see, the squatting movement then was hugely diverse, and this document, although it's got geographical and organisational things correct, like people were meeting at St Paul's Road and campaigning against the criminal trespass law, those things are correct, but it seems to have in it quite a lot of political interpretation, which I think, I don't know if they're trying to please someone who this report was written for. It sort of implies things were a lot more anarchistic than they were, although anarchists were important, and suggests that squatting appeared to be more of a political thing than it was. Although squatters became political, people squatted through desperation. That's what happened in Elgin Avenue. They were desperate people. I'm just flashing through this thing in front of me in the printed version because it's, you see, this thing here, yes, there's one he says on page 2, he says, these are not numbered paragraphs. He said, the truth is that over 80%, this is the squatters, do not want council housing because it would require that they meet certain obligations. You see, that's just not true. I mean, in Elgin Avenue, everybody who was offered housing took it. Nobody turned it down, and it did involve obligations. Obviously, you're paying a license fee, and eventually, when people were rehoused, it was a rent. Now, there were anarchists in the movement who said we shouldn't accept any rehousing. We should squat on forever because that's like a new future. And I just said, look, that's ridiculous. I mean, people have come here for housing, and that's what they want. And if it means paying rent, then they'll pay rent and they'll want to. And that's exactly what happened. So, see, this document is written, I don't know, from the point of view of somebody who was anarchistic and wanted to believe certain things. See, we don't know who wrote this. Was it a sort of anarchistic person who sent it in hoping to convince the police of something? I don't know. What is the origin of this document? But I would say, as it is, it's a oversimplification of the reality. And I've got another mark here. Oh, yes, about the police. It says on page, the bottom of the page, no, it's all the same number here. It says, the general attitude towards the police is one of complete non-cooperation. Well, that isn't true either. I mean, attitude towards the police was just a practical matter. I mean, it's as most people's attitude towards the police is. And indeed, in Elgin Avenue, we didn't seek cooperation with the police, but when we needed to discuss things, or when they wanted to discuss with us, we did. And I remember a specific case, very illustrative, of there was somebody who had been making trouble in the street, living in there and harassing women and serious stuff. So we told him, we had a street meeting and told this guy he had to go. And we removed him from the squat. We told him somewhere else he could go and live, but he wasn't going to be allowed in Elgin Avenue anymore.
Thank you.
But the police turned up when there was this, they could hear arguments in the street because the police station wasn't far away. And the police said to me, they said, well, okay, he stays on that side of the road and you people stay on your side of the road. So they actually endorsed what we had done.
Mr. Corbyn, can I ask you a follow-on question from this,
Yes.
which is this? I mean, you mentioned when you were answering questions earlier that you were surprised that given squatting activism was such a major part of your political activity in the 1970s, that there are so few intelligence reports disclosed to you that actually deal with your squatting activism. Why is that? Why are you surprised about that?
Well, given that they put so much effort into following my detailed activity in Irish or whatever, and when I moved from Arundel Street to Elgin Avenue, I'm surprised there wasn't, looking back, logically should have been police who would move into the squat because they could completely spy on me easily that way by being squatting in Elgin Avenue. And if they'd done that, they would have produced a report. But we don't see any reports from them so far as I can see, which is puzzling because in the mind of the special branch, surely our squatting activity was, well, I don't know. They might think us seeing me going to a Troops Out movement meeting was dangerous, but surely a squatting activity would be equally dangerous if a Troops Out movement thing is deemed dangerous. So I don't know why they weren't there. Or perhaps they were, and we haven't had any reports of it. And perhaps Sir John would like to look into that. I mean, do they have reports which are no use, or that put me into an embarrassingly good light? I mean, I just don't know. I'm mesmerised. Mesmerised.
Mr. Corbyn, finally this. Is there anything else that you would wish to say to the chair of the inquiry to assist him in his search for the truth as far as the police spying on you is concerned?
Yes, if we want more search for the truth, I would say, well, we should ask them point blank, did you have any police agents in Elgin Avenue? This Nigel and Mary who turned up in Huntley Street, who were they actually working for? Were they, in fact, sub-employees of the Sheriff of London, or was it another special branch link, which they don't want to tell us about? Certainly those things. Also, what was the aim of the special branch in all this activity? Because, I've been surveilled for a decade. I mean, for what? I mean, they haven't accused me of doing anything dangerous in the sense of these reports. I would have thought that there's better use, frankly, of police time than this sort of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. That's all I ask, sir. Yes. I hope I've used my 10 minutes and no more.
You have indeed done. Thank you. Mr. Corbyn, can I say two things to you?
Yes,
First
sir.
of all, thank you very much for illuminating the campaigns, groups and activities in which you were involved in the late 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. It is refreshing to hear an account by someone who participated as widely as you did.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you found it useful.
And it paints a side of the picture that I don't get from the documents and always from the former undercover officers and their managers' evidence.
No.
You say, in response to the last question of Mr. Menon, for what reason were you surveilled?
Mhm.
I'm looking not so much at surveillance overall, but at the infiltration of groups to
Yes,
which you belong,
okay.
in which you participated by undercover officers. That is one of the very basic questions that I'm going to attempt to answer.
Good. Your Honour, thank you. I mean, it was, well, quite exciting to be able to read a sort of diary from certain eyes of what I was doing. And I'm astounded that I remembered so much. But, you know, the whole purpose of it needs clarification, absolutely. And I wish you every success in getting clarification. So.
Thank you for that. Your evidence is now over, and Mr. Fernandez will announce the closure of this morning's session. I intend that we should resume at 2:05 because we've overrun slightly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now take a break for lunch. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to please remember to join your breakout rooms. The time is 1:05 p.m, so we shall resume at 2:05 p.m. Thank you.